Hello and welcome to the Pandemic Podcast here on today's episode. Just myself, my first solo episode in over 2 weeks, with this episode entitled State of the Nation. Having been away for 2 weeks, having had a wonderful 2 weeks off on paternity leave following the birth of my son. Well, I say wonderful, somewhat of a roller coaster. Those of you who've got children know that it's no easy feat. So in this episode, I plan to recap take a whistle-stop tour of some of the headlines and the news that's been unfolding over that 2-week period. I had the pleasure of tuning out from what's going on in the world so I could focus purely on my wife and son. And of course, as predicted, the tide is suddenly rising once again with some of the crazy headlines that we've been seeing. So I'm going to take us as a summary through some of the hand-picked headlines that my team and I have extracted over the past couple of weeks to really take an assessment of the state of the nation. And for those of us with our eyes open, what a state we are in. Now, I will pre-warn you, if you're about to watch this content, none of the things I'm about to show you are particularly positive, but I will try and bring somewhat of a whimsical take on these things and highlights in places where I believe that we can start to make a difference. So without further ado, I'm going to take you through this hand-picked selection of stories. So first of all, one of the things that struck me most of all was Boris's announcements about England's winter plan. The question of whether we will be facing lockdowns again and what kind of restrictions and mandates are likely to follow. Now, 2 years on, going into a second winter, have we really made the decision now to finally live with the virus, or will we see mandates, restrictions, and lockdowns come forward again? So, Boris, I did watch of all the things to watch. I did watch the announcement with his Plan A and Plan B. Now, whenever I see anything like this, I seem to be very skeptical. But I think Plan B or Plan C is probably the actual plan. Now, the Plan A is very much of a light touch as expected, and I'll talk about expectations in a minute when I'll show you my own predictions, which I put out on Facebook prior to taking a break. Of course, centered around vaccinations, the COVID booster jabs being offered to 30 million people in the over 50s and those younger adults with health conditions and frontline health workers, at least to start with. We know how this goes now. There's a plan, there's a formula. And rolling out to 12 to 15-year-olds, which I'll talk about more in depth as we move into that piece going forward, with continued use of NHS test and trace. In terms of winter preparedness, the flu vaccine has been extended significantly to over 50s and secondary school pupils, and various other bits and pieces. Plan B, seemingly a sizable step up, but not as far as stating lockdowns are going to happen. Potential compulsory face masks again, advising people to work from home, and the dreaded vaccine passports, which again I will talk about more as we go along. When the government was pressed on, what would be the metrics, what would be the measure, as always, completely vague. But say they would be keeping an eye on hospitalizations and changes in some of the headline figures. And ultimately, once again, the NHS as being the kind of chess piece that the government is playing on. Now, for the sane of us, which increasingly... I'm scratching my head. If you watch my interview with Matthias Desmond yesterday, fantastic interview talking about why so many still buy into the narrative. When I laugh at the saneness, because it seems so many have fallen for this conditioning that we've been subjected to over the last 2 years, leaving just a sane few to hold the mantle. But the sane of us realize that there's probably more at play here, and the reality is the NHS every winter, if you look back at the newspaper headlines for the last decade, you will see that the NHS has been grossly overrun. It's been hugely underfunded and poorly run in certain areas, leading to the dramatic headlines that we've seen this year. Lack of hospital beds, emergency triage overrun, ambulance shortage, all of these things. But we know this is going to happen this winter. And we could see that this is coming this winter, not only due to COVID, which I'll comment on in more detail as we go through this, but of course, the ridiculous hospital waiting lists that have been created as a result of COVID policies, plus the skeleton staff, which have been created by COVID policy and potentially mandatory vaccinations, which again, I'll come to in a moment. But a whole manner of other illnesses that are likely to unfold as a result of the fact that we've basically battered our immune systems by remaining locked down for such a period of time over the last 18 months, where we had no real opportunity to expose ourselves to any form of illness in this kind of cultural safety world we live in. But as a consequence, we're now seeing a whole rise in other illnesses. In fact, we very sadly had to take a trip to A&E with our boy, Zach. It was mainly parent fear over a slight a series of symptoms around a stomach problem that little Zach had. Everything was fine. But when we spoke to the nurses and the doctors at A&E, they're seeing tons of admissions of all kinds of illnesses that they would normally see in a winter period. But of course, the children haven't had the opportunity to circulate. And therefore, throughout the summer, they've been treating things like RSV and all these other forms of illness that you would not normally expect to see in the summer, because we just simply haven't allowed children to allow the immune system to follow its natural course due to these lockdowns. So we can clearly see and project and predict that the NHS, no matter what, even if COVID didn't exist, even if there was no impact of this respiratory virus, NHS would still be under pressure this winter. And when we look back over last winter, certain parts of the NHS were certainly overrun, particularly the ICUs. But there was large portions of the NHS that were significantly below capacity. That's visible in the official data. So we have to ask our questions, the winter plan, really, where is the preparation for what will be a tough winter? Where is the investment in infrastructure? Where is the stories around what the NHS has done to plan for the increased demand, the likely increase in demand, plus its usual winter pressures? So to put NHS as the single chess piece once again, to me, it just blows my mind, because we know it's going to be under pressure, and that will just be the lever. We know it's going to be the lever, protect the NHS. It's become the jewel in the crown, of all the things that politically has been made a scapegoat for policy, the NHS, given how little attention it's really had in the last decade. And if you weren't certain that the government doesn't really care about the NHS, then quite frankly, their refusal to pay the pay increases make it very clear that the government doesn't really care about the NHS. It's simply a political ploy to justify its draconian decision-making and authoritarian approaches to managing a virus. Now, I will continue to look at some of these other pieces that has come up around this subject. Boris rips up the COVID rules. Now, if you haven't heard me talk about this before, or if you haven't witnessed it yourself, the British government has a very clear formula that it uses. It's a framework for its public communication. It's 3 Ds. Number one is deny. We will deny that we will do this. It's something that we're not going to do. Take vaccine passports for an example. We deny it's going to happen, despite the fact that if you actually look into the contracts that the government has signed with transferring millions of funds to people who produce vaccine passports, you really have to see the humor in that. So deny is the first piece, then deliberate, discuss, we're now considering this, and then finally deploy. Now we're doing it. And it's just a cycle. Just look out for it. Whenever the government says we're not going to do that, you may as well put a tick in a box. We're going to do that. So no more national lockdowns as Boris rips up the COVID rules. Watch this space. Watch this space. This is the deny, deliberate, deploy cycle in full swing. It just begins here in September. Now, I could be wrong, and I hope I am wrong, because believe me, one of the things that frustrates me most about this entire situation is this ridiculous idea that lockdowns in any way help the situation. It's simply an illusion. And if you watch the lockdown summit from July last summer, earlier in the summer, that we hosted, we presented all the evidence that showed that they're a flawed policy. And great to see that actually that summit has started to get some press attention as we close in on winter. So yes, no more lockdowns, ? Well, we will see. Winter lockdown, experts in the Telegraph, experts set out 3 scenarios, the good, bad, and the ugly. I haven't seen at least, the ridiculous modelling. I was expecting to see at the press conference that the Prime Minister delivered the ridiculous models that have never materialised. I mean, just again, going back to the sane individuals, the ones with their eyes open, like you and I, we can see that no matter how many times they roll out this projection, this worst case scenario charts, that they're never going to happen. Thankfully, they're never going to happen. Thankfully, they don't happen, because if they did, we would be in a much worse situation. But it's just becoming the boy cried wolf almost. And, that's a worrying part around it. So in this article, they set out, the possible scenarios from what the government is calling Plan A all the way through to full national lockdowns and so forth. But what's interesting about this article is it deploy, talking about protecting the NHS, it breaks down some of the hideous statistics and the serious challenges facing not only the NHS, but the British public, the public in the United Kingdom, because the NHS is already overwhelmed. Let me show you. Up to 14 million, think about that, 14 million people could be on NHS waiting lists by next autumn. Just to put that in context, that's 20% of the entire population of the United Kingdom on waiting lists, according to an analysis by the IFS. Nearly 5.5 million people are currently waiting for routine operations and procedures in the United Kingdom, in England, that is. England alone, that's up from 4.4 million in February 2020. An increase of over 1.1 million. The waiting list is increasing by an estimated 150,000 people every month. More than 385,000 patients have been waiting for over a year for surgery, including hip and knee replacements. And before the pandemic, the figure was 1,600. What an outstanding increase. Ambulances across England answered more than 1 million calls in July, and waiting times were the longest since the method of logging calls was introduced in 2017. So we can quite clearly see the NHS is already under pressure, thanks to, nonetheless, lockdowns and other draconian policies that has plunged the NHS into this depths of hell, really. So you can look forward to the winter with the usual winter pressures, plus all of this backlog, plus any havoc that COVID may or may not cause. What's winter going to look like? I did say that it's not going to be full of positivity, this episode, but unfortunately, I do believe we are in for a very challenging winter. Next up, what do we got here? Oh, furthermore, in the Telegraph, Alison Pearson, the cancer backlog scandal is so much worse than you think. Alison Pearson says at the start of the pandemic, I said that lockdown could end up killing more people than COVID. I wish I had been wrong. And this whole article goes into the whole scandal around cancer and, the sad loss of life that is occurring as a result of the failure to diagnose and treat what was typically or traditionally known as the big C. But sadly, it's become the little c compared to the big C, which is now COVID, which in my mind is completely backwards because, if you your chances of dying if you get cancer are significantly higher than if you get COVID. So it's really, really, really quite shocking. And there we are debating lockdowns again. So I said I made some predictions. I put these up. On my Facebook. When did I do this? On the 14th of September, prior to that was just before the PM's announcement, predicting booster rollout, mandatory masks, work from home orders, mass testing, childhood vaccinations, potential circuit breaker lockdowns, vaccine passports as part of the toolkit, and some minor rollback of the Coronavirus Act. I mentioned that what won't be talked about, but likely further vaccine mandates. We'll come on to that. Healthcare and education. We'll come on to that. Vaccines, childhood vaccines extended to 5 to 11 years. We'll come on to that. Will any evidence of cost-benefit analysis be presented? No. What can we expect, though, is a series of charts with cherry-picked data. Yep, absolutely. The dramatic projections didn't show up. I was wrong on that one. No real mention of the past decade of the NHS winter pressures, as we've just discussed. Nonetheless, protecting the NHS will once again be the likely slogan of the hour. Tick. This winter will provide the opportunity to show that we can live with the virus, which is my view. And it's time that we take a different approach. So yes, let's see how I got on those predictions. Booster rollout, yep. Mandatory masks on the plan B. Work from home orders on the plan B. Mass testing, tick. Childhood vaccinations, tick. Circuit breaker lockdowns in plan B. Vaccine passports part of the toolkit in plan B. Yep. Minor rollback of the Coronavirus Act. Yep, it's happened. And all the other things, as I mentioned. So it really has become innately predictable what this government is doing. There's patterns, and you don't need to be Mystic Meg to see what's happening here. There is the piece of uncertainty where I can't predict at this moment in time, and I need more information, is what's going to happen to the economy, because we've basically gone now for nearly 2 years running the economy on no gas, running it on fumes. We're at the precipice of probably one of the worst recessions we've seen in decades, and it's just not talked about. So what financial measures will follow is one that I will be paying very close attention to, and bringing a series of reports on the Pandemic Podcast and a series of experts. Plus, on the vein of that, what we can do as citizens to maximize our own opportunity in the current conditions, because a lot of people in my audience have asked for that. What can we do now to protect our finances, but not only protect our current finances, but how can we increase our finances through things like cryptocurrency, etc. So we'll be bringing some things like that to the podcast in the near future. Now, I talked about the winter. Now, I want to get real for a minute. They did mention this during the press conference. I was wrong about my predictions for the summer. I will confess. The difference, I think, between many of the people that are challenging these restrictions and the scientific principles actually are the ones that hold their hands up and say, no, my predictions were wrong. Many of my predictions that I've made over the last 12 months have been correct. But in this case, my predictions around what we see in the summer have been defied, at least on the cases. I didn't expect to see this volume of cases. But I was reasonably correct on the healthcare and other measures, but I didn't expect to see this rise. But nonetheless, I bring this up because to highlight the point of the challenges of winter, just how I mean, I'm an optimistic person by nature, but I'm bringing a dose of realism to what we're going to see this winter, because we can't forget that this essentially is a respiratory virus, and most respiratory viruses are not more dangerous necessarily, but more impactful during winter seasons. We saw that in the first year of COVID. We've seen it around the world, following the kind of traditional Gumpert's curves around with seasonal impact. That's why the summer peak here was not really expected. But the scientists appear to be treating this as though it's comparable, and that we won't see comparable to a winter peak, and we won't see a further winter peak. Well, I'm skeptical of that. I am skeptical of that, sadly. If we take a look at, I can't look for today's date. Unfortunately, the data isn't there. But if we go as far as the 14th of September this year, comparing the caseload to the 14th of September in 2020, you'll see on the 14th of September, we had 3,000 cases in the UK. On the 14th of September 2021, 30,000, over 30,000. So, pretty much 10 times as many cases. Now, of course, you and I know, if I look at the testing data, we'll have a brief look at that in a minute. There's a high chance that we're testing dramatically more, therefore detecting dramatically more cases. But nonetheless, there is we'll take a look at them now, just a piece of curiosity. We'll look at the 14th and the 14th. Let's take a look at the 14th of September. 216,000 virus tests conducted. Let's look here. 882,000. So 4 times as many tests. So it's not, so we can see that there has been an unexpected increase in cases despite the increase in testing, which is worrying on the basis that what will we see in the winter? It could be that we are actually in an endemic phase. We could be. That was fantastic. Or we could see the seasonal swing. But my view is we don't need to be over projecting the harms, but we've got some additional challenges that have been posed by human intervention through the previous lockdowns, but also now through the vaccinations. And, I'm at a point where I can't say too much about this on the channels that I broadcast to, but I'll come back to that another time, because I believe the vaccinations are going to pose a separate challenge. If you look at early evidence of ADE, I'd say there is some early evidence. I'm no scientist, but and a lot of scientists dispute it. But I think it's something that needs to be explored and could pose additional challenges. So what will happen this winter, who knows? But the government doesn't really have anything in its toolkit other than lockdowns. And just think about, as soon as the hysteria starts kicking in, where does the government go? It can go through stage 1, stage 2 of its plans, but ultimately, politically, it doesn't have any other tools in the toolbox, and it's been primed by the public and the media that is the solution, even though it's not. So, I'm skeptical about the lack of lockdowns, and I believe that it really is. Now is the time to start confronting the fact that we have to live with this. We really do, but that can only happen with sound public health information, so that people actually understand which people are more likely to be at risk, whether they're vaccinated or not, because that's really important. But in the absence of that sound public health information, then how can people make their informed choices about their own health? It's very, very difficult. And there was a survey, I haven't got the UK data, but the US data. They surveyed members of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and they were about the levels of people that have been hospitalized due to COVID, and they were woefully wrong. They overestimated the burden on the hospitals by an order of magnitude. They were so far out, which is clearly as a result of all the fear-mongering, the sensationalism. People's perception is so wildly inaccurate. And therefore, how do people actually judge the risks for themselves? They can't. When I was talking to Rainer Fulmick on Monday, he said one of the primary questions he began asking when he began his coronavirus committee was, how harmful is the virus? Well, the public information around this doesn't give us that really doesn't give us any indication. So good luck. Things have to change. We have to change things in order to change approach. Now, meanwhile, Wuhan scientists plan to release coronavirus particles into cave bats, leaked papers reveal. A controversial project this is in the Telegraph, $14 million dollar project to fund controversial project in 2018. When you read this article, it gets worse. The way that the people involved, surprise, surprise, are some of the ones that have been at the center of the investigation of the origins of COVID-19. And this gain of function, genetic engineering, really to enhance the capabilities of these coronaviruses, is really, really quite shocking. And a researcher from the WHO said it was alarming that the grant proposal included plans to enhance the more deadly disease of MERS, to make it more deadly, to make it more dangerous. This is real research that's happening in the very lab whereby in Wuhan, very close to the site where allegedly COVID originated. So fascinating article. I'm going to do a lot more on the origins of COVID because I have a lot of questions there. And I've also seen some really interesting evidence and some really controversial approaches to how the WHO is seemingly investigating the origins. It's just to me the most corrupt thing I've ever seen. Interesting enough, on the back of this article about the plan to release coronavirus particles into cave bats, there's this is in the Times. This is not a conspiracy site. The 7-year coronavirus trail from mine deaths to a Wuhan lab. One of the world's closest known relatives to COVID-19, the virus SARS-CoV-2, was found in 2013 by Chinese scientists in an abandoned mine, where it linked deaths to a coronavirus-type respiratory illness. This article is just fascinating just fascinating. And there's many more. So like I said, I'm not going to go into depth on the origin of COVID-19 here, but you should be asking questions. And if you are interested in reading some of the evidence on the Swiss policy research page, you can go to swprs.org. They've got an entire segment on lots of different articles and pieces of evidence on the origin of COVID-19. This is something I believe really does need properly investigating, because if we do want to avoid something like this again in the future, we really do have to understand the nature of this research and gain of function activity within these in these biolabs. So I'm just putting that there in the news. You may or may not have seen that over the last couple of weeks. Now let's talk about vaccine passports. On the back of talking about lockdowns, Tony Blair says the vaccine passports can prevent another lockdown. How? The vaccines don't prevent infections or transmission, so all you're doing is creating honeypots of infections that are specifically and exclusive to those who are being vaccinated. But this is a worrying sign, because what you'll notice politically now, it's trade-offs. It's like, to avoid lockdowns, we want you all to get boosters. And when that doesn't work, to avoid lockdowns, we're going to have to deploy vaccine passports. So it's this or that mentality. And politically, it's much easier for politicians to say, well, I'd rather do that than this, even if both options are not good options. What we should be looking for is actually more creative solutions, or more less harmful solutions that we should be looking to how do we minimize total harms, including civil liberties and human rights, but harms to liberties, which vaccine passports pose a fundamental challenge to the way we live our lives. And really, when you look inside of this article, it really cements the point that we basically creating a society where we're sick until proven healthy. Creating digital technocratic society whereby everything is tracked and traced. We know these things are never going to be temporary. Really, even though the government has poured cold water on this was last week, poured cold water on vaccine passports. As I've mentioned, we've got the deny, deploy, deliberate, deploy, and this time we've got a fourth D delay. My personal view is the government wasn't ready to launch these in September, and they have literally put it back in their toolkit because they want it as a staged plan this winter, because when things do start getting worse, that will be the first step in their plan, the plan B. We can see that. Nonetheless, in Scotland, Scotland are going ahead with it. Scotland have been pretty harsh compared to England on many different things. So it looks like, unfortunately, the discriminatory nature of vaccine passports will be taking place in Scotland, whereby people are going to be forced to eventually be vaccinated to access society, which is, to me, one of the most shocking things that I've witnessed in my entire adult life. So Scotland could be the first and only part of the UK, although Wales could follow suit. Interestingly, in the Scotsman, COVID vaccine passports should be expanded to become full-blown medical ID cards. Now, this is, again, one of the other principal concerns around vaccine passports is the very nature that they are essentially digital IDs, or the precursor to digital IDs. Even if it's initially limited to medical ID, where this thing could go is, quite frankly, very worrying. And not just a future worry, but a present worry, because as in Breitbart, the NHS admits that vaccine passports, the app, the NHS app, is sharing user facial recognition data with the police. So, all of those claims about your data being secure and privacy, all those concerns that were purely dismissed, just completely false. We've got a situation here where people's data is not just their data, but their actual facial images are being compromised. More on the police shortly, because of course another thing to rear its ugly head in the last few weeks is the police bill. I'll come on to that in a moment. But good news in some ways is that there is a legal challenge in Scotland. This is fresh from today. Legal challenge planned over vaccine passports. The Nighttime Industries Association Scotland has said that there's serious flaws, and really good to see that there's a legal challenge moving forward here. So hopefully the first of many legal challenges. I think it's going to need to be taken very seriously. But do I have any faith in the courts? Well, on the back of today's decision around childhood vaccinations, I'll say absolutely not, but I'll come on to that in a minute. But if you do want to take decisive action on vaccine passports and you feel very strongly that the United Kingdom should be rejecting vaccine passports, then I thoroughly encourage you to go to the Together Declaration and sign the declaration, which has now received close to 100,000 signatories since its launch. So go to togetherdeclaration.org. Help share that, and hopefully we can reach the six-figure mark very quickly. And please be aware that come October, when Parliament resumes, there'll be plenty of activity with the Together Declaration, specifically with Parliament and ensuring MPs are engaged around this really important subject. So your voice is required, your signature is needed. So please do sign the declaration and share it on social media and with your friends. Now, talking about discriminatory vaccine passports, let's talk about another form of discrimination: vaccine mandates. We've seen, obviously, that the vaccine mandates are coming for the care homes, kicking in November. And as a result, we're seeing lots of people resign, people leave their livelihoods. So the unvaccinated care home staff are now going to be moving to the NHS, which creates a tricky dilemma. Yes, it does, because around 40,000 care home staff are going to be quitting or being sacked due to this policy. Now, again, just think for yourselves for a minute here. Winter season, we've talked about the hazards of winter, full stop. And one of the primary groups that is most vulnerable during the winter is the elderly. So what's the best thing to do to help the vulnerable? Well, let's leave the care homes completely understaffed, shall we? Let's enter draconian, unheard of policies to force people to make a choice to be vaccinated or lose their job, and leave the care homes wanting. That's exactly what's happening. And again, there's legal challenges around this right now. But just ask yourself: is this the actions of a government that really cares about its people and the vulnerable? In my view, it's absolutely not. So we're going to see droves of people leaving care homes radically understaffed during one of the most pivotal points of the year, when the elderly are most vulnerable. Very, very, very shocking. But unfortunately for those moving to the NHS, good luck. You'll be I think they'll be facing the very same decision when it comes to the NHS, because, as always, the government has launched a consultation for mandatory vaccination for all NHS staff. Now, we've seen many of these consultations that have arisen in the last 18 months, put out to the public, thousands of people write in, but the government do what they want anyway. So quite clearly, this is, to me, an indication that very soon mandatory vaccinations will be vaccines will be required in the NHS for all staff. So here we are again. You might be jumping ship from the care homes to the NHS. Well, that's both care homes and the NHS decimated, because there are plenty of staff within the NHS who simply refuse to get vaccinated, and by trying to force them isn't going to change a thing. It might sway a couple because their livelihoods depend on it, but the majority of them have made a decision because of their own personal with their own personal reasons. So we're in a very, very, very dangerous time, and the fact that the mission creep is already beginning. This is the problem when you open the door to these draconian authoritarian policies, as you wedge open the door to more and more and more authoritarian policies. Starts with care homes, then it's NHS. What next? My view is, as I said in my predictions, that we'll see further sectoral. Public sector will be next. I think there'll be all kinds of mandatory vaccinations, but we are facing a point in time here, history, where our right to bodily autonomy is being violated. And today it might be a COVID vaccine, but what could it be tomorrow? To me, this is a very, very, very dangerous predicament we find ourselves in. Similarly, what's this article? Unvaccinated care workers in England could be redeployed. Yep, we're going to see that again. We've talked about the hazards of that, care homes being ravaged. But if that discrimination isn't enough, we're seeing private employers discriminating against the unvaccinated and those who choose not to be vaccinated. Morrisons are cutting the sick pay for those who are choosing not to be vaccinated. So again, a clear sign of discrimination. It's described as a dangerous and retrograde step, cutting pay. And it's purely to encourage people to be vaccinated with the new policy. And threats aren't really a way to encourage someone, in my view. This is a classic sign of the mission creep across now going into the private sector, and more of this draconian authoritarian style leadership, completely deplorable. Now let's talk about the big issue of the day. Sadly, children. This was announced last week that the children are going to be aged 12 to 15 offered the COVID jab. This was following the JCVI, the Joint Commission for Vaccinations, actually saying that the risks the risks outweigh the benefits. Yet the 4 chief medical officers overruled that piece. And if you followed my tweets and my messaging around that, there was lots of celebration when the JCVI said that, because people have seen the real adverse, the actual levels of adverse reactions and harms amongst adults and amongst children in different parts of the world. So many people celebrated, but I said, hold your horses, because in the fine print, it was clear that this has been passed to the politicians, and unsurprisingly, the politicians have made a political decision. And this, to me, is one of the most concerning aspects here. We've looked at the data around the potential harms to children from the COVID, and exceptionally negligible. Again, there's always exceptions, but there is risks. Every medical intervention comes with risks, and some of those are significant, which we'll touch upon in a moment. So the government has clearly made a political decision, and the JCVI clearly mentioned that they were uncertain. That's putting it lightly. And again, if you learn to watch political speak, you can see that these types of phrases are really massaged to limit the kind of emotion to it. But when someone describes it as significant uncertainties, you know that what they're really saying is this is not good news. So the JCVI made it clear that the rare cardiac complications can occur, saying that is a reason alone to not pursue the vaccines. Yet here they are being deployed, and then lo and behold, new study: vaccine side effects 6 times more dangerous than COVID-19 hospitalization for teenage boys, showing that the vaccine side effects and heart problems are worse than what you'd experience of COVID. Now, this is a paper for the fact checkers watching. This is a scientific paper. You can ban me from social media, but I'm simply showing the evidence. And this is another issue that we're facing: is that the facts around vaccine harms and the facts around vaccine efficacy are being hidden. I've seen endless personal accounts of people who have shared their own personal struggles or adverse reactions, or worse, had their accounts taken down, blocked. It's just unbelievable. Anything that could discourage anyone else from taking the vaccine is simply dismissed as anti-vax and removed from the internet. It's really, really, really quite concerning. And I truly believe, as Professor Desmet said last night, that we are on course for one of the worst healthcare outcomes, perhaps in recent history. Certainly one of the greatest political disasters, as well as a terrible health outcome. And we should not be placing our children under this type of harm. And having become a father myself right now, I would stand. There's no way these people are coming near my children. On this, I wouldn't normally share the daily expose as one of our sources. It's not always on point. But in this case, 13 reasons why you should not allow your child to get the COVID-19 vaccine. You can check that out. Some really interesting resources that they've shared. And again, it just leads you to, regardless of what you think about vaccines, full stop, the message should be very clear: safer to wait. But it gets worse. COVID teams can vaccinate pupils against parents' wishes. Right. So apparently children are able to make their own informed consent. Well, I think the adults are struggling. So putting it on the children is just unbelievable. And just one of the most frightening things I've seen. I mean, there was a court case I haven't got the news article for this one. There's a specific court case which argued that it was around hormone therapy, which is involved in gender transformation. It stated, I believe, that the young people were not Gillet competent, so they couldn't make. They at that point in their life, they weren't able to make such important medical decisions. without parental consent. Therefore, that should become wide-reaching to other areas. So it's an important case, legal case. But at this point, it just seems like coronavirus legislation seems to overrule all precedent. But this, to me, is deeply shocking, and it's unsurprising to hear of parents keeping their kids out of school, which is devastating because it's the child that suffers. But again, there's only one way you can look for this, and that's to the government for significant overreach and unbelievable decision making. Furthermore, on this, today, this legal case took place in the High Court, where a legal team took to the High Court to ask the COVID jab to be paused. This is off the back of the COVID Assembly's approach, with Francis Hoare involved. I watched the legal case today, and lo and behold, unsurprisingly, the injunction was not passed. Therefore, and the appeal, the judicial review that they requested, has been denied. Unsurprisingly, the courts have just allowed it, and it was deeply heartbreaking to watch the court. But I would be taking the names of those judges and writing their names in history if sadly things go wrong, because that was an opportunity to save those children. The argument is made that everyone has a choice, and that at this point, as a result of people having a choice at present, that they're then therefore not at risk. But people just don't have the full information to make that choice. So this to me is one of the most worrying things that we've seen. Now, it mentioned in the previous article that head teachers are worried about protesting. Well, the right to that gets bleaker. The right to protest may be under threat, with the police bill rearing its ugly head again, undermining vital democratic principles and human rights. Despite this, the Lords did come out and say this is not the way to legislate. The Lords have slammed the police and crime bill for being too big, wide-ranging, and draconian. It has certainly not passed yet, but it's like many pieces of legislation, it's making its way through. The Home Secretary bill is nothing more than silencing of the protest, according to political commentator Ian Dunt. But the good news on this front is there is a great deal of resistance, including faith leaders. An alliance of over 350 organizations have come together to cry the police bill. Much like the Together Declaration, groups of organizations are coming together. This has nothing to do with Together, this particular activity. This is the Police Bill Alliance, who are challenging this bill. So my question at the beginning of this is, what is the state of the nation? Unfortunately, it's in a pretty bad state. None of this is particularly good news. But realistically, it's important to be informed of where we're at. And as we saw with the conversations with Professor Matthias Desmet, most people just aren't seeing this. And actually, until it affects someone in their own backyard, or until it affects someone personally, people just don't pay any attention necessarily. And we saw from the conversation yesterday that the kind of background reasons why people are less likely to be skeptical. But it's down to those people like you and I who have our eyes open, who are looking at these issues, to be really courageous in continuing to speak our minds, to share our truths, and to share these stories as they come out. Because until we do that, our fellow citizens, humanity, is facing these challenges blind. And it's down to us to raise the alarm. And I, on a personal level, have made great sacrifices over the last 18 months to continue to do what I do. I've foregone all of my business interests, my social life, my everything that I normally take for granted, in order to dedicate myself almost fully to raising the alarm around these issues. Because for me, as I talked about yesterday, the fear of the virus, I've never really had the fear of the virus. I had the virus myself, got over it, no problem. But I did have a real fear of where things were going from very, very early on, and continue to be fearful of where this could go. But it's important that we don't get stuck in the fear of where things could go. I've talked today about what could happen in winter. I've talked today about lockdowns and the harms from the coronavirus or the vaccinations. We can't live in fear, because fear is disempowering. Fear disempowers us. It takes us away from our inner personal power, our own inner freedoms, and our abilities to affect change. And I see a lot of people right now drowning in the fear of tomorrow. What we need to be looking at is a compelling vision for tomorrow, so that we have something more exciting, something more beautiful, something more abundant to move towards. Because right now we're stuck in a trap, we're stuck in a cycle, but that cycle will come to an end. And we must be ready to be building and co-creating a better world for the people and the planet in the shell of the old. So, as I said, not a lot of good news in terms of what's gone on the last couple of weeks. We know things are going to get more challenging over winter. We can see that, but we have to ready ourselves. And the good news is, what I'm witnessing is the resistance to what's happening is growing. It's growing significantly, but not only is it growing, it's becoming more organized. There's greater collaboration, greater connection, and as a result, we will see much greater pushback on this government overreach that we're witnessing. And eventually, I do believe justice will be served. But in the interim, it's important that we continue to share credible, reliable insights about what's happening, telling our personal stories about how these things are affecting us individually and collectively, and also looking for creative ways to challenge policy and raise awareness. And one of the ways, protesting, I've mentioned that today, protesting has a significant part to play. A lot of people get frustrated at protest because they don't feel it changes anything. It takes time. If you look at any great protest movement in history, it's repeated action over time. And what we'll see at every single protest is that the movement is growing. So for those of you in the United Kingdom or nearby, I hope to see you on Saturday in London. I'll be there with the Pandemic Podcast crew, recording and participating in the demonstration, the public assembly in London this Saturday. So, if you're watching this and you feel strongly about some of the issues that we've raised, do come along. If you've never been before, you're going to be joined by hundreds of thousands of people who feel very similar to you. And it's a very, very powerful way to step into your own personal power. And if that alone reinvigorates you, that helps you step into your own personal power, then that is a result, because you can carry that momentum into your own day-to-day life. Now, I will be talking on the podcast a lot more about some of the things that I do believe that can be done to tackle some of these policies that can start to create change. But on many ways, I'm starting to feel that resistance is futile. It's still necessary. Resistance is still necessary. It's like yin and yang. But in many ways, it's more important that now we start to look forward, and we start to create, and we build that vision for tomorrow, and we start to paint more compelling solutions that bring people with us. We build a movement that is not based upon on activism purely, but on creation and on building a better world. Because what is evident right now, when people start to see the real fundamental challenges with what we've witnessed in the last 18 months, they'll see it's the same challenges that affect every other area, whether that's issues surrounding discrimination, equality, sustainability, all of the kind of human rights, all of the issues that many people have campaigned for years around, have the same common enemy. It's the same global elites, it's the same systems and structures that cause the majority of the problems that we face in the world. Nothing is different. We are united on that front. But at this point, not everyone sees that. But over time, they will. And when that time comes, that will be, the catalyst for real change. And I feel like there is a great awakening. This winter, I think we'll see a rising of that energy. This is it's in the spiritual dimension as much as it is in the legal and political. By that, I think we can carry the torch forward with love, compassion, empathy, and unity. That unity is coming together. So I hope you found this episode useful. Again, not all brilliant news, but we must use this. This awareness is the first step to change. Having awareness of what's happening is the first step. And once we step from awareness into action, then we can truly start to make a difference. So I'm going to say goodnight for now. I'll be back again tomorrow. Look forward to our next episode. And thanks again for tuning in. If you haven't seen it this week, I had 2 fantastic interviews. On Monday, I was with Rainer Fulmich. That was taken down from YouTube already. It's been censored, despite having record numbers of viewers for a single broadcast on the Pandemic podcast. You'll find that on Odyssey. It's still available on Facebook. You can still see it on Twitter. If you haven't checked out the Odyssey channel, we've got all of the uncensored content on there. You're just going to look for the Pandemic podcast on Odyssey. If you join our Telegram group, you'll get the links to all of our content. And ultimately, I advise you to join our mailing list. All of our listeners to join our mailing list, which is at danjgregory.com/pandemic. It's the one platform I have complete control over and able to communicate with you and to keep you posted about not only our content, but any forthcoming campaigns that we're involved with. So please take a moment to do that. If you haven't done so already, it'll just take literally a moment of your time. Enter your name, your email address. I don't email very frequently, just keep you up to date on the content. So do that. Join the Together declaration, which I shared during this broadcast, togetherdeclaration.org. And I hope to see many of you in London on Saturday. And if you do join us in London, do come and say hello to me and the crew and share your story. I look forward to meeting some of you on Saturday. And good night for now. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.